They believed a soul could be weighed. Admiral Eva Valerius watched the ultimatum timer bleed across the main tactical display, its crimson numerals stark against the cool cobalt of the system map read UTU 5947. 2 million souls in the convoy behind her, and a Krathan warlord who saw them as a single-line item on a ledger. Her ship, the fleet carrier Vigilance, felt unnervingly still, a predator holding its breath in the void. The only sound on the bridge was the faint rhythmic hiss of the life support system, a counterpoint to the frantic pulse in her own throat. "Status Solon," she said, her voice a low command that cut through the tension. The fleet mind's synthesized voice, a calm baritone that had been her constant for a decade, emanated from the air itself. "Warlord Malik's fleet maintains formation at the system's primary gravwell inflection. 36 capital hulls supported by 108 Lancer-class escorts. They are broadcasting their ultimatum on all open channels. Surrender of the civilian convoy's genetic archive or total annihilation. His doctrine is unchanged. The Krathan Ultimatum Doctrine. A philosophy of conquest built on a simple, brutal calculus, present a target with a choice so unbearable that submission becomes the only logical path. They never negotiated. They presented the bill and expected payment. It had pacified a dozen star systems. Humanity sent a different kind of accountant. "He believes we will break," Commander Jian Li murmured from the tactical pit, his knuckles white on the console's edge. "That we will sacrifice a part to save the whole." Valerius tapped her fingers on the arm of her command chair, feeling the faint vibration of the ship's primary reactor deep in its hull. The Krathans see life as a resource to be managed, an asset on a balance sheet. They don't understand that our archives aren't just data, they're a promise to every child down there that their future is non-negotiable. A soft chime drew her attention to a secondary screen. It showed a filtered feed from the civilian ship Horizon's Hope. Inside a brightly lit creche, a young teacher was holding up a glowing datapad, showing a dozen toddlers, a holographic image of a spiraling galaxy. The children's faces were a mixture of awe and sleepy contentment, utterly oblivious to the warships bracketing their existence. The teacher's calm smile was a testament to a courage greater than any warrior's. The stakes were not abstract. They had names and faces. "Solon, are the mirror lattice arrays fully deployed?" Valerius asked, her gaze hardening. "All 1,024 arrays are in position." "Admiral," the AI confirmed. "Their stealth fields are stable. The Krathan sensors show only empty space. Our heat sinks are at 97% capacity. We are ready for Operation Phantom Passage." They would teach him the cost of his arrogance. Valerius stood, her slight frame casting a long shadow in the low light of the command deck. "Jian, signal the convoy. Tell them to begin their burn on my mark. Lieutenant Sharma, I want you to cascade the first ghost signature the moment they move. Make it a perfect echo of the Horizon's Hope." Admiral Sharma's voice was crisp from the electronic warfare station. The glare from her console painted her face in shifting green light. Valerius looked back at the main screen. The Krathan fleet was a wall of predatory icons, a promise of absolute destruction. Her fleet, the 3rd Expeditionary, was a fraction of their size, composed of carriers, destroyers, and the 1,000 tiny lattice arrays that were their only real hope. They were not here to win a slugging match. They were here to rewrite the rules of the fight. "They've offered us a binary choice," Solon. Valerius set a cold fire in her eyes. "Surrender or die. We're about to give them a third option, and that is Admiral. They can learn." A debt was about to be paid in full. The timer ticked down. 02:45:12. Valerius gave a sharp nod. "Mark." Instantly, the convoy ships, lumbering civilian haulers and colony vessels ignited their engines in a synchronized low-power burn. They began to creep forward, sliding into the carefully planned corridor of space shielded by the invisible lattice. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Sharma's fingers danced across her console. 1,000 kilometers to starboard, A perfect sensor illusion flared into existence. A ghost convoy identical in every detail, right down to the specific engine frequencies and heat signatures of the civilian ships. First Phantom is live, Sharma reported. The Krathen are reacting. Their forward pickets are turning to intercept the ghost. Their doctrine demands they verify every variable. Jian noted a hint of grudging respect in his tone. They can't abide an unknown on their ledger. The Krathen lancers, sleek and deadly, peeled away from the main fleet. They fired low-power ranging beams at the Phantom convoy, expecting a return signal that would confirm their material existence. Instead, the mirror lattice arrays caught the energy, absorbed it, and then projected it back with a subtle, calculated delay. To the Krathen sensors, it looked like a perfect solid reflection. Their own eyes would become their cage. "They're taking the bait," Valerius said. The hull of the Vigilance hummed with rising power as they prepared for the next phase. She could feel the deck plates thrumming beneath her boots. Solon begin the cascade. Phase 2. Executing, the AI replied. Generating secondary and tertiary phantoms now. Across a vast swath of space, more illusions bloomed. A squadron of human destroyers appeared on the Krathen's flank. A carrier group materialized behind their rear guard. Each ghost was meticulously crafted, a masterpiece of misdirection, woven from light and energy by the lattice. The Krathen fleet, so monolithic and confident moments before, was suddenly surrounded by a sea of potential threats. The calm, orderly map on their bridge was now a chaotic storm of contacts. "Warlord Malik is hailing us." Sharma reported, a slight tremor of excitement in her voice. "He's displeased." On screen, Valerius ordered. The face of the Krathen warlord filled the display. He was a creature of sharp angles and brutalist biology, his gray, chitinous skin scarred with what looked like ritualistic markings. His voice was a rasp like stone grinding on stone. "Admiral Valerius, your pathetic illusions are an insult to the art of war. The ultimatum stands. The ledger must be balanced. Your time grows short." Valerius met his gaze without flinching. "Warlord, my only intention is to clarify the accounting. You seem to have miscalculated the value of your assets." "They would not break the line." His mandibles clicked in a gesture of contempt. "Your species clings to sentiment. It is a fatal flaw in your code. You will learn this lesson shortly." The screen went blank. "He's angry," Jian observed. "Good. An angry commander makes mistakes. He's not just angry. He's confused," Valerius corrected. "His doctrine has never faced this before. It assumes a rational actor who will choose the path of least damage. We are presenting him with an irrational board." The real convoy continued its silent, steady progress. They were halfway to the designated jump point, a region of space where the system's gravity was weak enough for their FTL drives to engage. The Krathen, meanwhile, were spending precious fuel and processing power chasing shadows. Their lancers fired torpedoes at phantoms that vanished a second before impact. Their capital ships wasted immense energy charging primary weapons to target ghost carriers that flickered out of existence. Each wasted shot was a victory. A sudden alarm blared, a sharp, insistent cry that cut through the bridge's low hum. "Energy spike," Sharma called out. One of his battleships, the Iron Reckoning, it's firing its main cannon, not at a phantom, at the space between them. Valerius's eyes narrowed. Pattern analysis. He's not aiming at a target. He's firing a wide dispersion beam to try and clip a real hull by accident. He's sweeping the board. "The lead convoy ship, Horizon's Hope, is in the beam's projected path," Solon stated, its calm voice a chilling counterpoint to the alarm. "Impact in 15 seconds. Probability of their survival 0. The teacher and the children." The image flashed in Valerius's mind. "Hold the faith. Hold the line." "Solon, what's the optimal strategic response?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The loss of one civilian vessel is statistically acceptable to ensure the escape of the remaining 99%, the AI answered without hesitation. Sacrificing the Horizon's hope is the logical choice. Here it was. The cold calculus she had been fighting against her entire career now coming from her own fleet mind. The conflict triangle pulled taut her moral line, Solon's logic, and the Warlord's ultimatum. She refused to become a mirror of her enemy. No, Valerius said the word, ringing with absolute finality. We don't sacrifice anyone. Sharma retask arrays 70 through 110. Forget the phantoms. Concentrate their reflective surfaces into a single focal point. Target the path of that beam. Admiral Sharma questioned, her hands already flying. The power drain will be immense. We'll burn out their core conduits. Do it, Valerius commanded. Jian, prepare a counter-surge. The moment the lattice reflects that beam, I want every Krathan sensor to see our flagship right where their battleship used to be. It was time to settle the account. Anya Sharma worked with focused intensity, her console flashing as she rerouted terawatts of power. The designated mirror lattice arrays tiny, unassuming drones spread over 100 kilometers, swiveled in perfect unison. Their mirrored surfaces capable of bending light and sensor waves now angled to form a single massive concave receiver. They were building a shield out of pure physics. On the main view screen, the Krathan beam weapon appeared as a catastrophic river of white-hot energy, a lance of starfire designed to atomize anything it touched. It crossed the void in seconds, aimed not with precision, but with contemptuous arrogance. The crew on the bridge held a collective breath, the only sound the faint thumping from their own suit-integrated heart monitors. The beam struck the focal point. For a microsecond, there was only impossible light. The arrays, pushed to their absolute limit, caught the torrent of energy. The beam didn't splash or detonate. It bent. The focused mirrors, a marvel of human engineering, performed their function with impossible grace. They accepted the blow and in the same instant returned it. The river of light was redirected, folded back on itself, and sent screaming back toward its origin. Their own weapon would be their judgment. The crew of the Krathan battleship Iron Reckoning had less than a second to register the anomaly on their screens. Their own weapon energy, amplified by the return journey, was coming home. The beam, a perfect echo of their own malice, struck the ship's forward command section. There was no grand explosion, just a silent surgical annihilation. The vessel's front third simply ceased to be vaporized into incandescent gas. The rest of the hull, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, began a slow, silent tumble into the dark. A stunned silence fell over the bridge of the Vigilance. The alarm cut out. Lieutenant Sharma slumped back in her chair, her face pale with sweat and adrenaline. Direct hit, she whispered. The beam was returned to sender. The Iron Reckoning is gone. The cost of the maneuver flashed on a side display. 32 mirror arrays were offline, their cores fused from the strain. The Vigilance's own power levels dipped precariously as its systems compensated for the surge. A minor but tangible price. Damage report, Valerius asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt in her own hands. Arrays are slagged but replaceable. Jian reported, his eyes wide. We scorched our own relays, diverting power. Minor repairable damage. The convoy. Admiral, the convoy is untouched. They had refused to pay the price, so the enemy paid theirs. On the tactical map, the remaining Krathan ships had frozen. Their confident, aggressive postures had vanished, replaced by confusion, and perhaps the first flicker of fear. Their doctrine had no protocol for this. An enemy who could turn your own strength back against you was not on their ledger. Warlord Malik's flagship, the unflinching Slate, remained silent. The ultimatum timer continued its inexorable countdown, but the context had irrevocably changed. He's recalculating, Valerius said, watching the enemy fleet. He just witnessed an impossibility. He's trying to fit it into his worldview. His worldview is based on the idea that overwhelming force, is an unanswerable argument, Solon stated. We have just answered it. This event will have a non-zero impact on his crew's morale. A new vignette appeared on Valerius's private screen. It was from a maintenance crewman aboard the Vigilance stationed near the strained power conduits. The man was checking a glowing panel, his face smudged with grease. He looked up at a small framed photo taped to the wall, a picture of his family on a green, sunlit world. He tapped the photo gently with his glove, a silent promise before turning back to his work. The fight wasn't just for admirals on bridges. It was for every soul in the fleet. A single moment can rewrite a war. He won't stop, Gian warned. His pride is at stake now. His entire doctrine has been challenged in front of his subordinates. I know, Valerius replied. This wasn't the winning move. This was the opening one. He thought this was a siege. He's about to find out it's a classroom, and the lesson is humility. The countdown timer read 01:58:22. The convoy was nearing the jump point, but the Crathan main fleet still stood between them and freedom. The Warlord had lost a capital ship to his own hubris, but he still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. His next move would be different. He would be more cautious, more deliberate, and far more dangerous. Sharma. How are our remaining arrays? 70% are still fully operational, Admiral. She reported, her confidence returning. The rest are functional but running hot. We can't pull a stunt like that again without significant burnout. The scent of ozone from a nearby overloaded circuit faintly touched the recycled air of the bridge. We won't have to, Valerius said. That was the demonstration. Now comes the application. She turned to the fleet mind. Solon, begin seeding the Crathan tactical network. Use the data we gathered from their targeting patterns. Show them what they think they already know. Their certainty was now our weapon. The Crathan doctrine was rigid. It relied on precise calculations on knowing the enemy's capabilities and presenting a threat that exceeded them. Valerius had just shown them a capability that didn't compute. Now she would exploit the chaos she had created in their command structure. The lattice arrays no longer needed for a grand single reflection were repurposed. They began projecting micro-illusions, not of ships, but of sensor readings. A false heat bloom here, a flicker of a drive signature there, a ghost of a torpedo that never launches. Each was a tiny lie, a single drop of poison in their data stream. For a fleet that prided itself on informational supremacy, it was torture. They were being forced to doubt their own senses, the very foundation of their strategy. Warlord Malik is broadcasting again, Sharma announced, fleet-wide to his own ships. On the main screen, the Warlord's snarling face appeared. He was not addressing Valerius this time. He was rallying his own forces. Hold your discipline, he roared. The human uses tricks and deception because they lack true strength. Their mirror was a one-time gambit, a desperate anomaly. We are the Crathan. Our purpose is manifest. We hold the line, advance, and enforce the ultimatum. Never mistake desperation for weakness. The Crathan fleet began to move. They advanced not as a single cohesive wall, but in smaller battle groups, a clear sign that Malik was hedging his bets. He was sending his destroyers and cruisers forward, keeping his remaining battleships in reserve. He was adapting. He's learned caution, Gian said, his voice tight. He's probing, trying to force our hand. He thinks he's probing our defenses, Valerius countered. He's actually walking into the kill box. He just doesn't know it yet. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical map, where the advancing Crathan icons were moving deeper and deeper into the web of invisible mirror arrays. The trap is not yet set, Admiral Solon noted. The geometry is incomplete. The trap isn't the space, Solon, Valerius explained, a ghost of a smile on her lips. The trap is his doctrine. He believes there are only two sides to a ledger, profit and loss. He can't imagine a third column. And what is that, Admiral? The audit. The reckoning was not about destruction. It was about truth. The lead Krathan cruisers pushed forward their weapon ports, glowing with malevolent energy. They were now well within the effective range of the human fleet. The convoy was painfully close to the jump point, but this was the most dangerous moment. The final gauntlet. The air on the Vigilance's bridge grew thick with unspoken anticipation. Every officer was poised. Every system was spooled up to maximum. "They're firing," Sharma announced, her voice flat and professional. A storm of plasma torpedoes and particle beams erupted from the Krathan vanguard, aimed directly at the real human fleet, whose position they had finally confirmed. "GN execute defense pattern Delta," Valerius ordered. "Sharma begin Phase 3. Show him the looking glass." The human destroyers moved their point defense cannons, spitting curtains of superheated metal that intercepted the torpedoes. But the beams were another matter. They were too fast, too powerful to be shot down. Instead, the mirror lattice arrays came to life once more, not to reflect the beams back, but to bend them, to nudge them just slightly off course. A beam aimed at the destroyer. Steadfast was subtly warped, missing its target by meters and slicing into the empty void. Another, aimed for the Vigilance itself, was bent just enough to skim its shields, sending a shower of sparks across the view screen, but doing no significant damage. It was an intricate celestial ballet of energy and light. Their power was being unmade before their eyes. Aboard the Krathan flagship, Warlord Malik watched his instruments with growing fury. His best ships were firing, and their shots were missing. Not by much, but consistently. It was impossible. It defied the laws of physics he understood. His gunnery officers were reporting perfect target locks, but the results were a cascade of failures. "The humans are not just hiding," he rasped to his second-in-command. "They are editing reality." He was closer to the truth than he knew. The lattice was creating minute gravitational and electromagnetic distortions, warping the space around the human ships, just enough to spoil the Krathan's aim. It was the ultimate form of electronic warfare, not jamming their sensors, but corrupting the very fabric of space-time their weapons had to travel through. "Admiral, the convoy is entering the jump window," Gian reported, his voice filled with relief. "The Horizon's hope is first in line. They're beginning to spool their drives." A fragile hope bloomed on the bridge. They were going to make it. The universe does not care for hope. Suddenly a new variable appeared. 4 Krathan ships, which had been hiding in the shadow of a large asteroid cluster, broke cover. They had been playing possum, a reserve force Malik had held back for this exact moment. They were positioned perfectly to cut off the convoy's escape, flanking the jump point. It was a feint, Gian swore, his knuckles turning white again. His main advance was a distraction to position his ambushers. The Warlord's face reappeared on the screen, his expression one of triumphant cruelty. "Your tricks are clever, Admiral, but they are finite. The ledger always balances in the end. Did you truly believe I would commit all my assets to one column?" The 4 ambushing ships opened fire, not with beams, but with proximity-fused warheads designed to detonate and shred the unshielded civilian ships. There were too many coming from too close. The point defenses were overwhelmed. The lattice couldn't warp dozens of physical objects. This was the checkmate. Their doctrine was a hammer, and it saw only nails. Valerius watched the incoming wave of missiles. The timer showed less than 10 minutes. The convoy was trapped. Her heart sank. For a moment, the cold logic of Solon's earlier suggestion, a calculated loss, echoed in her mind. But she crushed it. There had to be another way. There was always another way. "Solon," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Run a full-spectrum analysis of the Krathan doctrine based on this engagement. Find me the loophole. Find me the vanity. Find me the one rule he will never ever break." The AI's processing core surged the air around its central conduit, shimmering with heat. Data flowed every transmission from Malik, every tactical choice, every word of his ultimatums from this and prior conflicts. It searched for the core axiom of the Krathan philosophy. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The first missile was moments from impact. "I have found it," Admiral Solon announced. The core principle of the ultimatum doctrine is not victory, it is demonstration. The verdict must be seen. The lesson must be public. His power is derived from the perception of his inevitability. Valerius's eyes shot open, a sudden fierce light in them. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The trap was not for the Krathan ships. It was for the Krathan warlord himself, Sharma. She commanded, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. "Get me a direct channel to every civilian comms network in the sector. Patch me into the Krathan public broadcast frequency. I want everyone to see this." "Admiral, he wants a public lesson, Lieutenant. We are about to give him one." Valerius stood tall. The missiles were seconds away from the horizon's hope. She ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on the image of Warlord Malik, who was watching, waiting for her surrender. "Giant, order the convoy ships to do the impossible," she said. "Tell them to open every viewport, turn on every internal light, and broadcast their internal camera feeds on a wide, unencrypted beam. Aim it directly at the Krathan fleet." Jian stared at her, uncomprehending. "Admiral, that will make them perfect targets." "Just do it, Commander," she insisted. "Trust me." Across the convoy, an order of incomprehensible madness was received. But they obeyed. Shutters on thousands of windows slid open. Lights in mess halls, living quarters, and creches flared to life. Unencrypted signals began to pour out into the void, carrying not tactical data, but images. The face of a crying baby. An old man holding a worn book. The teacher from the horizon's hope gathering the children into her arms, shielding them with her own body as she began to sing a lullaby. 2 million souls in their final moments decided not to hide in the dark, but to show their faces to their executioner. They would not be a statistic. They would be a witness. Aboard the unflinching slate, Malik's bridge crew saw the images. They saw the faces of the people they were about to extinguish. They saw the children. For the first time, the genetic archive was not an abstract concept on a manifest. It was alive. And it was looking at them. The warlord hesitated. His doctrine required a public spectacle of submission or destruction. But this was something else. This was a public spectacle of innocence. To fire now would not be a demonstration of strength. It would be a massacre broadcast for all to see, recorded on 1,000 ledgers. "Sir," his weapons officer asked, his own hand faltering over the firing solution. "The missiles!" Valerius's voice cut through the channel, calm and clear broadcast to both fleets and the entire sector. "Warlord Malik, you wanted to balance the ledger. Here are the entries. Look at them. Every life has a weight. We are taught that by our actions, not by our weapons. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." The missiles, their final stage thrusters already igniting, were seconds from impact. "Brace for the reckoning." Solon Valerius said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now." Executing, the AI replied. The final phase of her plan, the one she had held in reserve, the one she prayed she would not have to use, engaged. The mirror lattice arrays, all of them, the damaged and the pristine, activated in unison. They did not create a phantom. They did not reflect a beam. They did something far more profound. They bent light. Around the entire Krathan fleet, the stars began to move. The image of the distant nebula warped. The light from the system's sun twisted and distorted. The lattice was creating a massive system-wide gravitational lensing effect, a perfect illusion that made it appear as though the Krathan ships themselves were being crushed, folded, and squeezed by an invisible hand. Their sensors screamed with impossible gravitational readings. Their navigators saw a reality that was falling apart. But it was the visual that mattered. The Krathan ships now appeared to be firing on each other. The missiles launched by the ambush squad now looked as though they were curving back to strike Malik's own flagship. The beams from his vanguard appeared to be hitting his own reserve battleships. It was a perfectly orchestrated lie, a fiction painted on the canvas of space-time itself. A trap made not of steel but of perception. Warlord Malik saw Valerius's fleet vanish, replaced by the horrifying image of his own ships tearing themselves to pieces. He saw the missiles he had launched streaking toward his own command bridge. His doctrine, his discipline, everything he had built shattered in an instant of pure, unadulterated panic. "Cease fire," he bellowed. "Evasive maneuvers. They've turned us against ourselves." His fleet obeyed instantly. The cohesive attack devolved into a panicked scramble. Ships broke formation, their captains convinced they were being fired upon by their own brethren. The missile volley, now without guidance, flew harmlessly wide of the illuminated convoy. The carefully laid ambush had collapsed into chaos, undone not by a weapon, but by an idea. The human fleet had not fired a single lethal shot. They had simply held up a mirror that showed them the monsters they were. As the Krathan fleet tore itself apart in confusion, the last of the civilian ships slipped into the jump corridor and vanished in a cascade of silent blue-white flashes. The Horizon's hope was the final vessel to leave. For a brief moment before it jumped, the feed from its creche showed the teacher looking up, tears streaming down her face as her song ended. The children were safe. The ultimatum timer on the Vigilance's screen hit 0 and blinked out, its purpose rendered moot. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Jian Li was leaning on his console, breathing heavily. Sharma was staring at her screens, her expression one of utter disbelief. The Krathan were still in disarray, their communications a cacophony of panicked accusations. Valerius stood by her chair, her body trembling slightly from the sustained adrenaline. She watched the chaos she had unleashed. The cost had been high-strained systems, dozens of burned-out arrays, a crew pushed to the breaking point. But the alternative had been unthinkable. "Solon," she said softly, "record this engagement. Title it The Warlord's Ledger. Send a copy to the Admiralty. Send another to the Krathan High Command anonymously." "It will be done, Admiral," the AI replied, "and add a note." She continued, her gaze fixed on the enemy flagship, which was now trying to restore order. "Let them know that the bill for this lesson is still open, and that we will always be here to collect. The debt is not cancelled, it is transferred." The Krathan fleet was a wounded beast thrashing in the dark. On the main tactical display of the Vigilance, their icons scattered like thrown stones, breaking formation and broadcasting panicked contradictory orders. Warlord Malik's flagship, the unflinching Slate, was desperately trying to impose order on the chaos, its command signals raw with fury and disbelief. He had lost control not to a superior weapon, but to a superior narrative. He had been made a fool in front of his own men. "They are re-establishing command links." Solon reported, its voice cutting through the quiet awe on the bridge. "Malik has purged his tactical network and is rebooting from a hardened core. He is assuming logically that we infiltrated his systems. He's wrong, but it's a smart move," Jian Li said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "He's stabilizing. What's his next play, Admiral? He can't run. His honor won't allow it." Valerius watched the enemy fleet slowly, painfully begin to coalesce again. The initial shock was wearing off, being replaced by a simmering, humiliated rage. "He won't run," she agreed, her voice low. The faint scent of ozone still hung in the air, a reminder of how close they had come to the edge. "He will escalate. His doctrine has failed. His pride is shattered. He has nothing left to lose, which makes him the most dangerous thing in the universe. A monster unchained is a monster with nothing left to prove." "Admiral, long-range scans are picking up," something Sharma said from the EW station. Her brow furrowed in concentration. The Krathen are deploying a new formation. They're not oriented toward us. They're facing the system's star. On the main screen, the tactical icons shifted. The 35 remaining Krathen capital ships moved into a tight, brutalist spearhead. Their weapon ports, which had been aimed at the human fleet, now pointed toward the brilliant yellow-white sun that gave this system life. A cold dread far deeper than before settled over Valerius. "Solon, what are they doing?" she demanded. "They are linking their primary cannons into a harmonic convergence," the AI stated. The calm in its voice made the words even more terrifying. "They are preparing to fire in unison, not as individual ships, but as a single, massive weapon. Their target is the star's photosphere." Jian's face went white. A coordinated stellar strike. The resulting coronal mass ejection would be catastrophic. It would scour the inner planets. "There are 2 inhabited worlds in this system, Admiral. Billions of lives." The Warlord's new ultimatum was unspoken, but infinitely more monstrous. He could no longer threaten the convoy. So he would threaten everyone. He would hold the sun itself hostage. He was demonstrating that if his will could not be imposed, then all life in this system was a valid target. It was the ultimate act of spite. His ledger had only one entry left: mutual ruin. A new civilian vignette flickered onto a side screen. It was a live feed from the planetary capital of Xanthos, the system's most populated world. A crowd was gathered in a public square, looking up at the sky through a projection dome. They had been watching the battle, cheering the convoy's escape. Now their cheers had died, replaced by a confused, rising murmur of fear as the news of the Krathen's new maneuver spread. A father pulled his daughter close, his face a mask of helpless terror. The stakes had just escalated from 2 million souls to 2 billion. "He's insane," Sharma whispered, her hands clenched on her console. "No. He's following his doctrine to its logical conclusion." Valerius corrected, her voice hard as steel. "If the subject of the ultimatum refuses to choose, then the choice is made for them, and the cost is total. He is teaching us the final bloody lesson of his philosophy. We cannot stop a weapon of that magnitude," Admiral Solon calculated. "Our arrays cannot reflect that much focused energy. Our ships cannot absorb it. A direct confrontation is statistically unwinnable. The logical course of action is to withdraw." Once again, the triangle of conflict. Her morality, Solon's impeccable logic, and an enemy's brutal doctrine. Valerius looked at the image of the father and daughter on Xanthos. Withdrawal was not an option. It had never been an option. "Then we will have to be illogical," she stated. "Jian, bring us about. Set a direct intercept course for the Krathen fleet. Full power. They would stand between the innocent and the abyss." The Vigilance and its escorts turned engines flaring with defiant blue light. They accelerated toward the Krathen formation, a tiny David flying toward a gargantuan sun-killing Goliath. The disparity in firepower was almost laughable. But Valerius was not planning a conventional attack. She had one last trick, one final lesson to teach. "Solon, you said his power is derived from the perception of inevitability. We broke that perception once. We have to do it again, but in a way he cannot dismiss as a trick. A physical, undeniable consequence is required," the AI agreed. "Exactly," Valerius said. "His ships are powerful, but they generate an immense amount of waste heat, especially when charging their main weapons for a sustained, synchronized shot. Where does that heat go? It is vented through thermal radiator panels, located along the dorsal spines of their capital ships." Solon replied, instantly displaying a schematic of a Krathen battleship. "These panels glow incandescent when under maximum load. It is a known design limitation." A grim smile touched Valerius's lips. "A limitation we can exploit. Sharma, retask the mirror lattice. I don't want illusions. I want ovens." Their own fire would become their prison. Sharma's eyes widened as she understood. "Admiral, You want to use the arrays to reflect their own heat back at them to box them in. Precisely. We can't stop the beams they fire, but we can stop them from firing at all. We will create a thermal feedback loop. Every joule of energy they vent will be returned to them. We will force them to choose power down their weapons or cook themselves inside their own hulls. It was a strategy of breathtaking audacity, a non-lethal attack that turned the enemy's greatest strength, their overwhelming power, into their most critical vulnerability. It was the ultimate expression of her philosophy, mercy with teeth. You have the right to exist, but you do not have the right to threaten the existence of others. The geometry will have to be perfect, Jian breathed, his fingers flying across the tactical plotter. We'll need to position the arrays within meters of their radiator panels. It's a surgical strike on a fleet-wide scale. Then we will be surgeons, Valerius declared. The deck plates of the Vigilance vibrated with the strain of its engines, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to echo her own resolve. Solon plot the optimal flight paths for the arrays. We have one chance at this. Let's make it count. They would not break his ships. They would break his will. The remaining mirror lattice arrays, over 800 of them, detached from their stealthy orbits and accelerated. They were no longer invisible ghosts. They flew as solid objects, tiny silver darts converging on the Crython formation. Malik's fleet, preoccupied with its grand, terrible purpose, barely registered them as a threat. To his sensors, they were just debris or perhaps a last pathetic swarm of kinetic projectiles. The Crython are ignoring the arrays, Sharma reported. Their energy signatures are still climbing. They're 30 seconds from firing convergence. They won't make it, Valerius said. Steady as she goes, Jian. The arrays reached their positions with flawless, AI-piloted precision. They formed a cage of shimmering mirrors around each Crython capital ship, their reflective surfaces angled inward, aimed directly at the glowing red radiator fins. They were invisible, perfectly calibrated traps waiting to be sprung. Aboard the unflinching Slate Warlord, Malik watched the countdown for his final glorious act of vengeance. He would burn his name into the history of this system, a testament to the cost of defying the Crython. All ships report readiness, his tactical officer announced. Firing sequence initiated. 10, 9. Now Solon Valerius commanded. Activate the lattice, close the box. The reckoning is a closed loop. The arrays turned on. To the naked eye, nothing happened. But on the thermal spectrum, the Crython fleet was suddenly engulfed in a sphere of its own incandescent rage. The waste heat, instead of radiating into the cold vacuum of space, was instantly reflected back onto the ships that produced it. On the bridge of the unflinching Slate, alarms shrieked to life. Heat spike. Critical. All radiator panels are showing 200% thermal feedback. An engineer screamed over the comms. Core temperature is redlining. We're melting down. Malik stared at his displays in disbelief. The temperature inside his own ship was climbing at an impossible rate. The air grew thick and hot. Consoles sparked their internal coolants, boiling away. The very walls of his command deck began to shimmer with heat. The same reports were flooding in from every capital ship in his fleet. They were trapped inside a self-inflicted inferno. It's the human fleet, his second-in-command choked out, sweat pouring down his face. The debris. It wasn't debris. It's a cage of mirrors. The firing sequence stalled. Ships began to automatically shut down their primary weapon systems to divert all power to emergency cooling. But it was no use. They couldn't vent the heat, and they couldn't escape the mirrors. They were being defeated by their own thermodynamics. A lesson in physics is a lesson in humility. Valerius watched the thermal readings on her main screen. The Crython fleet, which had been a collection of glowing blades, was now a cluster of blossoming, uncontrolled suns. Malik, she broadcast on an open channel, her voice echoing across his sweltering bridge. Your ultimatum is over. The choice is now yours. Power down completely and surrender. Or continue to generate power and be rendered into molten slag by your own fury. The ledger is open. Make your entry. She had reversed the doctrine. She had presented him with his own brutal calculus submission or self-destruction. And she was forcing him to make the choice in front of his entire suffering crew. Warlord Malik, his chitinous skin cracking under the intense heat, looked around at his failing bridge. He saw not warriors but suffocating men. He saw his grand fleet, the pride of the Krathan armada, crippled without a single shot being fired against it. He saw his reflection in a sparking console, the face of a commander who had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. His arrogance had burned his empire. Their pride had finally overheated. With a guttural scream of pure, undiluted rage, Malik slammed his fist on the emergency shutdown command for the entire fleet. One by one, the Krathan ships went dark. Their weapon ports cooled. Their engines died. Their radiator fins faded from incandescent red to a dull, angry orange. They floated dead in space, defeated, silenced, and utterly humiliated. The only sounds on the bridge of the Vigilance were the quiet hiss of life support and the soft sigh of collective relief. They had done it. They had faced down an existential threat to an entire system and won without causing a single casualty. But the universe always demands a price. Admiral Sharma's voice was sharp with alarm. One ship. It's not powering down. It's Malik's flagship. He's overriding the shutdown. He's pushing all remaining power to his forward cannon. On the screen, the unflinching slate was a dying star, but it had enough energy for one last spiteful act. Its forward cannon, a weapon capable of cracking a moon, began to glow. It was aimed directly at the Vigilance. He would rather die than admit defeat. He's going to take us with him, Jian said, his voice grim. Evasive maneuvers. There's no time. Valeria stated, her eyes locked on the enemy ship. The Vigilance was too close. The shot was point blank. This was the cost of her mercy. The price of giving him a choice. Solon, calculate the optimal target for our counterfire. She ordered, her hand moving toward the weapons control on her own chair. This was it. The moment she had tried so hard to avoid. After all her clever tricks and moral stands, it was going to end in a simple, brutal exchange of fire. Her arc from restraint to decisiveness was about to be completed with a baptism of fire. Counterfire is not the optimal solution, Admiral, the AI said, its voice holding an unusual, almost hesitant tone. There is another option. The cost, however, is significant. Give it to me, she demanded. The Krathan cannon was almost at full charge. We can reposition a segment of the mirror lattice directly in the path of his beam, Solon explained. Not to reflect it, but to absorb it. The arrays will be vaporized, but they will buy us the 0.8 seconds needed for the Vigilance to clear the primary blast radius. However, the resulting energy flare will overload our forward shields and likely cause severe damage to the command section. Sacrifice a part to save the whole. The very calculus she had rejected. But this time the part was her own ship, her own crew, her own life. The final choice is always a reflection of the first. Valerius looked at her crew, at Jian, steady and resolute, at Sharma, her face a mask of focus, at the quiet professionals in the pit, all of them looking to her, trusting her. She would not fail them. Do it, Solon, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Jian, brace for impact. The command was given. The lattice arrays, their duty seemingly done, moved one last time. 100 of them converged in front of the Vigilance, forming a solid shield of silver. A moment later, the unflinching slate fired. A silent, impossibly bright spear of energy crossed the small distance between the ships. It struck the makeshift shield, and for a fraction of a second, the arrays held. They glowed white, then blue. Then they vanished, sublimated into nothingness. But they had done their job. The beam's coherence was shattered. The blast wave that followed, however, was still immense. It slammed into the vigilance like the fist of a vengeful god. The ship screamed a torturous shriek of protesting metal. The forward view screen erupted in a waterfall of static as external sensors were vaporized. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into a terrifying red-lit emergency state. Valerius was thrown against her command chair, the impact stealing the air from her lungs. An overhead panel broke loose, showering the tactical pit with sparks and debris. The price of victory is paid in scars. Slowly, the groaning of the hull subsided. The emergency lights stabilized, casting long, eerie shadows across the bridge. A low hum of auxiliary power returned. Valerius pushed herself up, her head throbbing. A thin trickle of blood ran from her temple. "Report," she rasped, her voice hoarse. "Structural integrity is holding," Gian answered from the floor where he'd been thrown. He was clutching his arm, his face tight with pain. "Forward shields are gone. The bow is a mess. We have multiple hull breaches on decks 2 through 5. Damage control teams are responding. Casualties. We have wounded Admiral, but no fatalities reported yet." Sharma. "Sensors are mostly blind, but I'm getting something on thermals," she said, her voice shaking, but steady. "The unflinching slate. It's gone. Firing that last shot with its heat levels already critical. It must have triggered a catastrophic core breach." The ship tore itself apart. Warlord Malik was dead. His final spiteful act had been his own undoing. He had chosen ruin over surrender. His ledger was closed. Valerius looked around her battered, wounded bridge. The cost was real. The vigilance was crippled. Her crew was hurt. But they were alive. And the 2 billion souls in the system below were safe. She had held the line. A public channel previously dormant flickered to life. It was a high-priority signal from the Krathan Imperium High Command. An automated system-wide broadcast. The synthesized voice was cold, formal, and stripped of all emotion. "By decree of the Krathan Praetorate, the operational strategy known as the Ultimatum Doctrine is hereby rescinded, effective immediately. Its failures have been logged for public record. All commanders are ordered to adhere to the revised Articles of Belligerence. Warlord Malik and his command staff have been posthumously censured and their ledgers closed with extreme prejudice. The precedent was set. The doctrine was broken, its failure logged for all to see. Across the system, the hundreds of remaining mirror lattice arrays, their purpose served, finally powered down. The brilliant, energetic silver of their active surfaces cooled, fading slowly to a soft, unassuming pewter gray in the light of the star they had saved. Valerius leaned back in her chair, the adrenaline finally leaving her. She thought about the brutal calculus of her enemy, this belief that a soul could be weighed and found wanting. They had tried to balance a ledger with threats and force seeking profit in submission. But a soul isn't an asset to be measured. It is the measure itself. Its value is infinite not because of what it holds, but because of the choices it can make to learn to forgive, to sacrifice, to stand in the fire for another. That is a truth no ultimatum can ever erase. A debt of malice can only be paid with grace.